Recently, I created videos relating to the creation of Flask-based APIs in Python. Today, I decided to change things up and I'm going to show you all how I actually go about consuming RESTful APIs in Python. To do this, I generally use an HTTP library for Python called requests. Requests is a very powerful HTTP library and it employs all sorts of tools, and today I'm going to go through just a few of them that I find the most useful so that you all can go ahead and start interfacing with the APIs that you all want to use. Before we get started, you are going to need to make sure that you have Python 3 installed and the requests module installed. Now, enough of the chit chat, let's go ahead and get started. For all of the examples today, I'll be using the HTTP bin website. HTTP bin is a website made by the actual author of the request module, and its entire purpose is to allow for us to have endpoints to test our HTTP requests against. If we take a look at the site, we can see this base URL at the very top. This is going to be the root URL of all the requests. And if we take a look under the HTTP methods section, we can actually see that we have routes for the basic HTTP requests. So now that we have all this basic information in mind, we can go ahead and set up some things in our Python script. So I'm going to come over to my editor, and I've already made a file, and it's going to be called test.py, and I'm just going to go ahead and start implementing some of the things we need to implement. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to have to import the requests module. So I'm just going to import requests, and I'm not going to rename it to anything. Feel free to rename it if you want to, but I'm not going to in this case. And then we're going to make a URL. This is going to be our base URL string. So it's going to be https http:/bin.org. And we are going to go ahead and put the tail end /. So that's our base URL. All right. Now that we're all set up, let's get started with a simple GET request. To make a simple GET request to that GET endpoint that HTTP bin provides, we're just going to type the following. We're going to type res is equal to requests dot get, and we're going to put our URL. Plus, we have to append onto the path the GET part of the path, and yeah, so that's it. So all we did there was tell Python to form a request and put the response of that request into the res variable. So now let's add a line to print the object. We'll just print res. All right, so that's where we're going to leave it for now. And now we're going to come down here and we're going to run our code. And when we run the code, we can see that an object is printed, a response object is printed along with a number. This number is the status code of the request. 200 means that the request was successful. Now, if we look back at HTTP bin, we can see that the GET request will return us this body. Now, this is a JSON response. So if we want to get that JSON response from request, we have to explicitly tell request inside of Python that that's what we want to do. So to do that, we're going to come in here and we're going to change just one line. Instead of printing res, we're going to print res and we're going to print the JSON. To do that, to get the JSON response back from a response object, all you have to do is call the .json method. Now, this isn't going to work if your request for whatever reason doesn't return JSON, but most modern APIs are going to return their data in JSON format. So we're going to save that file, we're going to run it again, and boom, now we can see that we get the actual response object back, which is exactly what we expect to have from that initial GET request that we made. Now let's try a post request. First, we're going to have to change our GET request to a post request like this. We're just going to change the GET here to post. And then instead of this GET, we're going to change it to post. Now, with post, we're usually going to submit some form of data in a JSON format, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add the JSON parameter. And we're going to set it equal to a dictionary. This can be any JSON serializable Python data, but we're going to use a dictionary. And so we're just going to do channel as our key, and then as our value, we're going to do ShandonCodes because that's the name of my channel. All right, so we're just going to save this, and we don't have to change anything else. We changed the post part, and we changed that we wanted to use the post endpoint, and we added some data. So now if we come down here and we run it again, we can see down here in the data that's returned from our post response is this exact object we sent, is this exact data we sent. We sent it this data, channel, ShandonCodes. Now, a lot of APIs, you're going to send different data depending on the requirements. Sometimes you'll have to send, like a query or something like that. But that was just one simple example, and that post request showed us exactly what data it would have received on the server side. Now, in addition to adding the JSON attribute, we can also supply additional headers. So if we wanted to supply additional headers, we would just add the headers attribute. So we're going to say headers is equal to, let's do a test underscore header, and we'll just set it equal to test is the value. And I will just save this. We'll come down here, we'll run it, and now if we look under the header section, we have a bunch of headers. We have an accept header, an accept encoding header. A lot of this request will already send for you. If we look further down, we can see that we actually have this exact test header that we were looking for, and that's exactly what we sent, so that's exactly what we're expecting. Usually headers are used for all sorts of things like authentication and things of that nature, but it's really up to designers of the API on how headers are used and what headers they expect you to send. Last thing we're going to talk about today are timeouts. With requests, we have the option of specifying a timeout when making requests. Being able to set an actual timeout limit is incredibly useful because we might want our application to behave a little bit differently if for some reason some resource we're trying to gather keeps timing out or is taking longer than we usually expect. We might want to, if we set a manual timeout, then we have control over when exactly our code is going to say, oh, I'm going to stop trying to attempt to get anything from this resource and, do something else, right? We control that behavior. So to display this timeout functionality, I'm actually going to use the delay endpoint from HTTP bin. So if we go to HTTP bin and we scroll down to dynamic data and we go to the delay endpoint, we can see that it will return a delayed response up to a max of 10 seconds. And so it's expecting you to send one parameter. That's what these brackets mean. It's expecting that to be a parameter. So it's expecting us to return to send a parameter not to exceed 10, and that delay is supposed to be an integer. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back into our code and we're going to change this request a little bit. So first things first, we're going to get rid of the header section and we're going to get rid of this JSON section, and we're going to go back to getting a GET request, right? So we're kind of back to the first example, almost. So instead of get, we're going to do delay and then / and we're going to do the max delay. So we're going to do 10 for 10 seconds, right? So now if we save this and I come down here and we do, so now I'm going to save that and I'm going to use the Unix time command to show us exactly how long the Python script takes to run. So theoretically we can get a good idea how long the request actually took. So to do that, I'm going to do time Python 3.8 and test, and boom, we can see that we did get a response back. It printed out the whole response, showed us which endpoint we hit, which was delay 10, and then wow, we got it back in roughly 10.3 seconds. So we got it back pretty much in 10 seconds, but that's exactly what we were expecting. Now what we're going to do is we're going to have to modify our code a little bit to say that we want a maximum timeout of 5 seconds. So what I'm going to do is add the timeout attribute to our GET request. So you can add just timeout and you'll set it equal to a float value. So I'm just going to set it equal to 5. That's valid. Now that I've set the timeout equal to 5, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to run the code. So I'm just going to do Python 3.8 and then test. Hit enter. And after waiting roughly 5 seconds, ooh, we see this huge error, right? But that's exactly what we would expect, because what happens if we look here, we can see that an exception was thrown, specifically the request exception read timeout. And then if we read over here, it says, oh, read timeout, and it shows us what timeout we were using. Read timeout is equal to 5. So, in your actual code, of course, you would handle this by catching that exception and maybe doing something else. But for the sake of this example and for the sake of being simple with it, I'm just going to leave it there. So ideally, of course, you would catch that error, but that's an error we expect to happen because we know we're hitting an endpoint that's going to take roughly 10 seconds. And I told it that this request can't take any more than 5 seconds. So that's why Python threw the error. So this was a very quick overview of a very small number of features that the requests module allows you to do in Python. I showed you all how to perform timeouts, how to perform GET and POST requests, and even how to supply your own headers and JSON bodies in responses. So that's it for this video. I'm going to make sure that I leave a link to all the resources I use, so HTTP bin, the requests module, and Python's documentation as well. And then I'm also going to leave a link to the code in the description down below, so make sure you check that out. If you like this video, if it really helped you get started with requests, or if it gives you the idea on what you can start with requests, please do let me know. Like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. And I'll catch you in the next one. See ya.
I'm falling behind. I wanna inspire, but they will not let me fly.